Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
That's live from the White House. President Trump in the cabinet room, still in opening remarks in a cabinet meeting that we wanted to bring you live here. And we'll go back to the conversation once the secretaries start to weigh in on the latest from their agencies and once reporters begin to ask questions of the president. Of course, the whole story involving Lisa Cook is the one that we're really all waiting to hear about. The president there covering the waterfront. He started by talking about the military, the strength of the U.S. economy, did make a few headlines along the way here. Talking about the development of AI, the domestic auto production that he says will be thrilling in 2 years, believes that oil prices will break $60 a barrel soon, and started talking more about furniture, as a matter of fact, having threatened furniture tariffs. He says will be done pretty quickly, reiterating that the furniture tariff will be very substantial, suggesting that generations of furniture makers in states like South Carolina will benefit from all of this. I want to spend some time with Stuart Paul, just as we wait for this to progress a little bit and to get some news coming out of the White House. These can typically, by the way, be hour-plus long affairs, and so we will bring you back into the cabinet room when we have an opportunity to do that. He's Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist, and of course, Stuart's antennas went up last evening when the president announced on social media his intention to have one of the Fed governors fired. Lisa Cook has since responded, and Stuart, her lawyer, says they're going to sue to challenge the president's move here. We have so many questions, though. The president says she is fired. We don't know if she went to the office today, if she logged into the email, if she badged in at the Fed. Do we have any idea about where any of this stands on a procedural level, Stuart?
Well, now it's up to Governor Cook, as it sounds like she is doing, to file a case against the administration. With that case, she's going to, I assume, file a motion requesting stay so that she can remain in her post pending further court proceedings. I imagine that stay would also be granted, but that is up to the judge. And if it is granted, she would be able to continue working as a member of the Board of Governors, voting on regulation, voting on monetary policy decisions. What seems to be most interesting here is that it will be up to the court to decide what constitutes appropriate cause for dismissal. It sounds like from the former general counsel of the Federal Reserve that typically cause for dismissal would come from failing to appropriately execute one's authority in the post of governor of the Federal Reserve System. This obviously, this attack on Governor Cook relates to allegations of financial misfeasance before she was really on the Board of Governors. And it even seems to be the case, based on the post that we saw last night and the letter sent by Trump to Governor Cook, that he recognizes that these allegations relate to dealings outside of her job, essentially, as a governor on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. But the allegations of financial misfeasance relate to her ability to execute her authorities, essentially questioning her competence. So it's going to be a really difficult case for the administration to win based on this alone. And so we're still just in a holding pattern, waiting for additional insights from the Department of Justice in their investigation.
Yeah, there's a criminal investigation underway at DOJ. You would have thought that referral might be allowed to play out here because we don't even have charges. We have to remind everybody, Stuart, never mind a conviction. These are just allegations that have come from within the administration. And I don't know what the timing was that got the president to write this letter last evening. But we should note that a president has never fired a Fed governor before. We heard from Senator Elizabeth Warren, of course, a ranking member of the Banking Committee in the Senate. She was out with a statement about 30 seconds after the president's letter, and she called it an illegal attempt to fire Lisa Cook. Is that also true, or does the president have grounds here if these allegations are correct?
It really depends what constitutes cause. If cause is narrowly defined as failing to execute or failing to be able to execute one's authority while in a role, such as governor of the Federal Reserve, then I don't think that this would constitute grounds for, or this would constitute cause for dismissal if cause is widely defined enough to include any sort of criminal action, and that were to be proven by the Department of Justice and in the courts, then I suppose so. But what's most useful right now, I think, is to think through the judicial process. We will get some additional insight from the courts as to what the threshold is for cause for dismissal. And I think that in that sense, given the fact that we knew that no matter what, Governor Cook was going to file a case against the administration and file a motion to stay in her current role, this essentially just speeds that up and will shed some light on essentially the evidentiary bar and what constitutes grounds for dismissal.
Well, in the meantime, the market says, call me when it matters, right? I mean, what do you make of the lack of reaction here in the bond and stock markets?
We essentially knew that this was coming, right? The Department of Justice investigation was underway. President Trump was exerting political pressure. He was demanding that she resign. She was resisting. This was always sort of the path that this was going to take. What I'm a little bit more surprised about is that rate cut odds for September haven't faded. I think that if anything, these additional political attacks on the Fed will encourage some members of the Board of Governors and some of the branch presidents to want to assert their independence, to say, look, when political pressure is mounting, consumers' inflation expectations can become unanchored. We do not want that to happen. And so we're more inclined to stand pat in September. I would have expected to see more of a fading of September rate cut odds, but no, odds still favor a rate cut in September despite these attacks on the Board of Governors.
Incredible stuff, Stuart. Thank you for a great readout here. Of course, Stuart covers not just economics. He is the U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics, with us from world headquarters in New York. A balanced view from Stuart Paul. Let's get into the politics behind all of this, because, of course, that's what Senator Elizabeth Warren would tell you this is all about, right? If Donald Trump can pull this off, have Lisa Cook fired, gain a majority on the board, we could start cutting rates before you know it, maybe have them significantly lower in time for the midterms. That's the Machiavellian view here. Maybe Rick or Kristen share this view. Let's put them together now. Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Republican strategist with us alongside Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn, partner at Rock Solutions. Great to have you both with us. Rick, what's your view on the president's decision to fire the first black female to ever serve as a Fed governor?
Look, he's looking for ways to exert his authority across the government. This isn't exclusive at all to the Federal Reserve. He's already done this to other independent agencies, been backed up by the courts. The Supreme Court, cautioned him on his conduct around the Fed because of its unique independence. But this is all about presidential power and his willingness to take risks with it to advance it beyond what has been traditionally approval for a president. And so he knows no limitations, and he's fine to let this go to the Supreme Court and let them tell him the extent to which a all-powerful executive branch can govern. And that's exactly what we're witnessing today.
That's the point of this, right, Kristen? Don't wait to find out. Just go for it. Write the letter. Maybe she will be fired. If not, we'll have another day in court here. That'll be news, and it all plays to Donald Trump's benefit. Am I warm?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, this is all about intimidation. I couldn't agree more with Rick when he says this is not just about the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is unique in a lot of different ways, and it'll be very interesting to see if it gets to that point what the Supreme Court says, given their earlier decisions a little earlier this year. But, this will extend beyond, and he's testing the boundaries. That's always what he does. He doesn't like what the Federal Reserve is doing. And so, he's going to extend this to other agencies, already has, and it's dangerous.
You wonder what this court case is going to be like here in the meantime. Rick, we need a functioning Federal Reserve. We need a board of governors not seemed as political when the markets listen to Fed speak, consider Fed statements, and interpret Fed rate moves. If we get a cut in September, is it going to be second guessed after all of this? The president's visit to the Eccles building, calls for Jay Powell to be fired or to resign, now an actual move to fire a governor. At what point does this spill over into the markets?
Joe, it's been amazingly benign so far. I mean, like all those things you mentioned and many, many more, right? There was a cycle about 3 months ago where every single day was bashing the Fed governor Powell and and even threats against him losing his job, right? And yet the market reaction has been very muted. And so until the president feels the heat from the market, I don't think he's going to know his own limitations, because we do know that the market has created some barriers for him when he went out on an incredibly aggressive tariff schedule. The market crashed and brought him back to a more managed approach. And so whether or not that is capable of doing now this deep into his first year, we're going to see, because I don't have any doubt that he's going to test that capability. And right now, the market doesn't seem to want to challenge him on it.
Well, and you wonder, what does the retail trader think of this, right? I mean, Kristen, if you bought NVIDIA last week and you're waiting for earnings on Wednesday night, you just might not care about what happens to Lisa Cook or Donald Trump for that matter. But at some point, we have seen things connect in the markets. And if there's a knock on the independence or credibility of the Fed, that really could, in fact, show up in interest rates or in stock prices. Interesting to hear from Senator Elizabeth Warren. You might have heard me mention her statement, Kristen. She referred to it as an illegal attempt to fire Lisa Cook, an authoritarian power grab, blatantly violates the Federal Reserve Act, she says, must be overturned in court. That means there will be no congressional response to this, right?
Yeah, and that's not surprising at all. And the first step is the courts here. So I think that, this will play out, in the courts. It's very clear that she's being very aggressive and pushing back on the president's move, and for good reason. Not surprising, the statement that Senator Warren put out. She's been obviously very, very critical of this president. But I would also extend this to say, this is a new unprecedented move. He's threatened Jay Powell, for a long time, but this is new. This is different. So, I would keep my eyes on the markets, and, what's the faith and confidence we have in, the United States of America and the information that we put out there. That's very concerning as well.
What do you make of the timing here, Rick? I mean, we knew that the investigation was underway. We knew that this could spell trouble for Lisa Cook. But why last night? Did he have dinner with somebody who had a problem with the Fed governor?
Look, I mean, this president has been incredibly aggressive. We call it flooding the zone. You can call it whatever you want. But there are 10 issues a day that could rise to this level of import. And they lust for the ability to challenge the media, to challenge them. And so I have no doubt that this was just the next thing in the queue that was waiting to be done. Just a matter of how much presidential time do you have to put him on social media and get him to make these pronouncements, and frankly have the rest of the government prepared for the reaction to it. So I don't think there's any art to the timing of the things that President Trump does. It's more like, what is the latest amount of ammunition we have to challenge the orthodoxy of people's criticism to this government. I mean, we need to understand this is the plan. It's going to be the plan for the next 3.5 years, and we need to get used to it. And there's all this kind of apology about, but look at the good people he's appointed to some of these jobs, and look at the ones that he hasn't. I mean, he just replaced, the head of Bureau of Standards, and that is an individual who, by all accounts, has not got the backing to do this. There are scores of those kind of individuals at the Department of Defense, and now you're looking at the Fed to have the same kind of activity.
No, we haven't even mentioned BLS in this conversation. Kristen, it's an interesting moment that we're in here. In our remaining moment, what are you watching to come from the sort of damage control corner? You're an expert on this. If you were representing Lisa Cook or advising her, would you tell her to start doing interviews? Should her lawyer, Abbe Lowell, be all over TV tonight?
That is the big conversation that always goes on between communications professionals and the lawyers.
Yeah.
I think to take a comprehensive look at it, and I think getting your legal ducks in a row is the number one most important thing. But there can certainly be an argument to be made in the court of public opinion, and that may be what she's looking to do.
Fascinating. We're going to find out together here, and maybe you'll hear some of these voices on Bloomberg. Great conversation with our panel. Kristen Hahn, Rock Solutions, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Bloomberg Politics contributor, with us from the Fishbowl today in New York. Thank you both for the insights.
Stay with us on Balance of Power. We'll have much more coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Got our eyes on the bond market as well as the stock market following this Lisa Cook news. The president moving to have the Federal Reserve governor fired. Of course, she's not leaving that easily, and her lawyer, Abbe Lowell, has already said today he will be filing a lawsuit to challenge this move. It's unclear exactly what grounds the president would have to fire Lisa Cook, as she has not even been charged with anything. Allegations, yes, coming from the administration, but the DOJ criminal investigation into her mortgage applications is ongoing. The president has been speaking for almost an hour from the White House inside the cabinet room. He's gathered his cabinet secretaries, and they're doing a bit of a round robin, as we've seen basically on a monthly basis since the president has been in office, getting updates on the agencies that, of course, correspond here. When he starts taking questions from reporters, and Bloomberg is in the room, we're going to bring you there for this conversation. I will note the name Lisa Cook, I believe, has not been mentioned. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, since this has begun. So we'll have reporters bring us to the news when that begins. To that end, Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg Washington correspondent, is on the North Lawn of the White House right now to kind of bring us up to date on things so far. Tyler, we've had a flurry of headlines. The president talking about everything from furniture tariffs to Russia's war in Ukraine. What else do you have?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, it really seemed that President Trump started his remarks in the cabinet room to tout his economic and industrial policies. As you mentioned, tariffs have come up a lot in this conversation. He name-checked some of these private sector companies, most notably related to automakers, including Ford and Stellantis, applauding their efforts to reshore supply chains, saying that that will help to bolster the U.S. workforce. Interesting to point out that he did note that he is expecting the next jobs report to show that government jobs are down, something that he applauded, and private sector jobs are up, in his words. Just to sort of drill down, it seemed like, from him on how this idea of reshoring supply chains, he says, is going to help the domestic economy. He also importantly pointed out that furniture tariffs are coming soon. Now, we knew that this is going to be happening. It's been widely expected after President Trump posted about it last week on Truth Social, but perhaps he put a little bit finer of a point on this, saying that they are going to be substantial as we wait to see what those rates are going to look like. I'll also put on your radar that President Trump did say that they are still in active negotiations with some of these trading partners when it comes to the trade framework, but that they did make progress with South Korea. The South Korean president was here yesterday, but interesting to hear the president highlight that he is working to get market access for U.S. agricultural products with our trading partners. And I bring that up because this has repeatedly been a sticking point in some of these negotiations, Joe, including South Korea, but also importantly with India. We know that this has really been a point of contention between the two trading partners, which have not been able to reach a more preferential rate when it comes to Indian exports. And of course, all eyes are on tomorrow, when we are expecting those tariff rates to go up even higher when the Trump administration imposes its so-called secondary tariffs on India over imports of Russian energy supplies.
As I mentioned, spinning a lot of plates today with the help of Tyler Kendall. Tyler, thank you so much for weaving all that together. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent will have more at the conclusion of the cabinet meeting as we try to have a better sense of where the president is pushing the agenda today. Some of us thought he would begin with remarks about Lisa Cook, but he's apparently going to wait for reporters to ask about this move, an unprecedented move. He would be the first president to fire a Fed governor if, in fact, this happens. with many questions about how that would work. And we'll continue to explore them a bit later on this hour, not only in this conversation with the President of the United States, but Kitty Richards from the Groundwork Collaborative is set to join us a bit later on this hour as well. There was a time we were using the term posse comitatus here on the program on a daily basis. That was when President Trump deployed National Guard troops on the streets of L.A., and there was a question about whether they may be deployed elsewhere, confounding many at the time. Because, of course, the idea behind the Posse Comitatus Act is that U.S. military troops cannot carry out civilian law enforcement actions. It's become a daily fact of life for us here in Washington, D.C., of course, over the past couple of weeks, with National Guard troops and many agencies, I believe a dozen federal law enforcement agencies helping to control the streets of Washington and what the president describes as a crime-infested city. Of course, this comes against the backdrop of crime in Washington following to a 30-year low, according to the Department of Justice. But the fact that these National Guard troops are now armed has brought a new wrinkle to this conversation, as has as well the president's threats to send National Guard troops to other cities. Next expected to be Chicago. This also will likely come up in this conversation today with reporters. It certainly did yesterday, and it's why we wanted to get back on the line with Robert McWhirter, constitutional law attorney, practicing criminal defense, civil rights lawyer from Maricopa County, Arizona. He's with us once again on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. McWhirter, it's great to see you once again. What does the Posse Comitatus Act think about armed National Guard troops on the streets of D.C.? Does it depend entirely on what their mission is, if they're helping to protect federal property, for instance, as opposed to conducting arrests here in the federal city?
What does it mean? Well, first of all, I heard you had a birthday, Joe. Happy birthday. Believe in that is
Thank you.
Sure. Posse Comitatus. You know those old Western television shows where it said we got to form a posse to go after the bad? That's Posse Comitatus. It's an old kind of common law back in the Middle Ages. It's power of the county. It's getting the county together to go after bad guys. That's where the term posse comes from. It's Posse Comitatus. So he's trying to evoke this kind of, lawlessness. We've got to get a posse together to go after lawlessness. In D.C., the president has more power to do so because ultimately the president is the head of the National Guard in the District of Columbia. Yeah. When he wants to go into the states like Chicago, no, the governor is the head of the National Guard. And the way that normally works, except for extraordinary circumstances, is the governor has to request, like there's a big flood or something and need national help to deal with it. Well, then the governor will make the request or whatnot. So this is the legal basis he's trying to go on. And you got to note, most of these cities he's going after, crime rates are falling. But more importantly, the Republican-controlled major cities, he's not talking about putting the National Guard in with them. It's only the Democratic-controlled cities that he's doing, which really makes this as just a political move and a political stunt and kind of underscores the ugliness of it, not the necessity to fight crime.
The president has used federal Title 32 orders to get us this far. Because this is in Washington, and to your point, he's got a little more leeway here in the federal city with armed National Guard troops. Do the guns make a difference, Robert, or that's just a development that the Secretary of Defense decided to move on?
I think it's just more for show than anything else. It's this continual image that we're tough. Now, what the guns do is you now have people who are not trained in police work. These people, these men and women of National Guards who have done great service for this country in foreign wars in Iraq and Iran, et cetera, Iraq rather, that's what they're trained to do. Now they have guns in a situation where they're not trained. Police get a great deal of training of when they can pull their firearms and when they cannot. And that's because the police serve us, the citizens. Well, now you have people that are trained in a totally different way of using their firearms, walking around a city street with firearms. Frankly, when Donald Trump says he wants to clean up Washington, D.C., I think that's a really bad look for Washington, D.C., because generally speaking, in a democracy, we don't want armed troops all over the place. It's a bad look for democracy. And the chance for something happening is just much greater when you have a bunch of guns with people not trained to use them in this context. They are trained to use their firearms, but not in this context.
We're showing people that view on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube right now, some images taken the night before last when these troops were first deployed with rifles and sidearms. Governor J.B. Pritzker is waiting for something to happen in Chicago. He's telling Trump not to come, not to deploy the troops there. Robert, he made a post on Twitter to Donald Trump and his administration. If you hurt my people, and remember, there are, of course, massive political overtones here for what could be a future presidential candidate. Nothing will stop me, not time or political circumstance, from making sure you face justice under our constitutional rule of law. A political bluster, maybe, but does the governor have any power to keep the troops out of his city?
Well, it's going to be a power to go to courts. You could have if you get to the situation where people are having this militia versus that militia. Well, the last time that really happened was the American Civil War. And I don't think we exactly want to go back to that. Remember, the firing on Fort Sumter in April 1861 was the South Carolina National Guard, essentially, that started the Civil War. So that's kind of what he's invoking. Look, a president can invoke the National Guard for a national interest and to protect a federal building. The best example of that was during the Civil Rights Movement in Little Rock, Arkansas, where President Eisenhower nationalized the National Guard to affect the national interests of civil right, which was directly under the dictate of the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and ultimately the 15th Amendment, but mostly the 14th Amendment. So there was a direct federal interest and a changing value in this country about the importance of fairness in education and racial equality. That's where we're talking about the National Guard coming in. And Donald Trump just saying, oh, I'm going to fight crime. Well, fighting crime on American streets belongs to mayors and governors who are crying for maybe federal help to have more police officers to hire. That's where you fight crime. More programs. Not sending in the National Guard, which is all a show so the Secretary of Defense can play with a gun. That's where we are.
I've been hearing those calls from governors and mayors as well. Robert, I have to ask you, I never thought I would be asking you about the Federal Reserve, but hey, you're on Bloomberg, so come on in. The water is warm. The president wants to fire a Federal Reserve governor. No one has tried this from the Oval Office before. It's unclear if he has the grounds. She's not been charged with anything. What do you make of this salvo that came from the White House last night?
Well, Joe, okay, I'm going to risk being a little too constitutionally geeky here, so I'll apologize right
Okay, let's do
it. What this really is about is your concept of the presidency of the United States. Donald Trump and his people talk about a strong unitary executive, okay? The Constitution gives all executive power to the president. The president, Article 1, starts with the executive power of the United States will be vested in the president of the United States. But it's always been known to be what's called a weak unitary. So there are checks and balances on the president. He wants somebody to be a commerce secretary or, secretary of state. They got to go get approved by the United States Senate, which is the legislative branch, right? Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so they created the Federal Reserve Board as an independent agency, and there's been several independent agencies because presidents have a great interest in making the economy look good while they're president, but they don't care when the other guy has to make the economy look good, who follows him, right? Which can be really terrible for the economy. I mean, Donald Trump wants to make interest rates as low as possible, which might be great to make him look good, but that could be terrible and could cause inflation to increase and cause ultimately employment to go down. So the Fed was created to be independent of that. And the constitutional question is Donald Trump's strong executive theory enough to give him that kind of control over the independent Federal Reserve? Now, economists are horrified at that idea because they want that decision to be independent. And I think the real question for Republicans who want to go after Cook just as an excuse, I think the case looks pretty protectual against her. But the real question is, if Barack Obama was doing this, would the Republicans like it? Because, you want to give the president all this power. Well, Republicans aren't going to always be in power. At least I hope not. And I hope Democrats aren't always in power because we have a better system when there's balance, right? Well, do you really want to block all these people yelling about Donald Trump should have all this power? They were the same ones saying that somehow Barack Obama was having an imperial presidency because he issued an executive order related to DACA kids. So remember, every constitutional argument, you got to look at sauce for the goose. Sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And you want to argue your position in the Supreme Court? Well, just think if there's going to be another president there someday who you don't like so much. Do you really want him to have that power, or do you want what the framers intended, which is a constitutional system of checks and balances with a weak unitary executive, not a strong one. So that's the underlying geekiness.
Fascinating. Leave it to Robert McWhirter to be our best guest on the Federal Reserve today. How did I know this was going to happen? So, Robert, she's fighting back. She's got Abbe Lowell. They're going to file suit. Does this go to the Supreme Court?
Oh, very well could be. And here's the issue in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has been this Supreme Court, over the objections of, for instance, Justice Kagan, Sotomayor, and Justice Jackson, have been very accommodating to the president taking over these independent boards. They were created to be independent. Well, in the opinions, the conservative justice says, well, this wouldn't apply to the Fed. And Justice Kagan, in one of her dissents, said, well, why doesn't your reasoning apply to the Fed? This is coming down, if the Supreme Court underscores and upholds the independence of the federal board, which I believe they should, well, then it begs the question, gee, Supreme Court justices, you like the Fed board to be independent because this helps the structure of our economy and the way business works. But when it's Consumer Protection Board, you don't like it. Maybe it's just because you don't like the Consumer Protection Board and you can say Donald Trump can get rid of these people, but we want to protect the Fed from Donald Trump, even Donald Trump. It makes these conservative justices on the court look pretty bad, but they should uphold the independence of this because the world needs an independent central bank for the greatest economy in the world, which still is the United States. And that's why people invest their dollars with their foreign money in U.S. dollars, which strengthens our economy, because we have an independent federal board. And 95% of all economists will tell you exactly what I just said.
Robert, the president is talking to his cabinet as you and I are having this conversation, and producer James is keeping me posted on what's happening in that room. He just suggested the death penalty. We're doing this in real time, so just walk through this with me here. Suggesting the death penalty for murderers in D.C. Here's the quote: "If somebody kills somebody in the Capitol, we're going to be seeking the death penalty, and that's a very strong preventative, and everyone that's heard of it agrees with it." Is this something he could do?
Dubious. He would have to have an act of Congress. And I think the best response to that is, well, what about what happened on January 6th with his supporters who killed Capitol police officers? And maybe they should get the death penalty now. Again, let's go with sauce for the goose. You want to start doing that. The death penalty, if you look at it in terms of its efficacy, it doesn't reduce crime. There are too many human behavior connected with crime is far too complicated. People don't usually make that calculus when they're in the middle of a situation where death results or commit the crime of homicide. I have represented many people accused with homicide, and I can tell you none of them all thought that clearly at the time they were committing that act. So this is another get tough thing.
Interesting.
And what he's talking about with juveniles and any cash bail are just things that are going to hurt people and not make anybody any safer in the long run.
All right, before you go, Robert McWhirter, you saw they've been setting up checkpoints here in Washington. ICE, it could be another federal agency, Department of Homeland Security, DEA in some cases. We're seeing officers identified. Tell our listeners and viewers what they should do if they run into one of these checkpoints in the District of Columbia.
Well, you got a couple choices. What you have a right to do is say, I don't want to talk to you. I don't have to talk to you. I can tell you my name. If they ask what's your name, you're pretty much required to say that. But you don't have to give in to the statements. Remember, we have the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which says you not be compelled to incriminate yourself in any way. So you can say, go pound sand. The trouble with that, of course, is if you just want to get to the grocery store, you might not want to spend the next 3 hours messing around with some checkpoint. So you have the right to assert your rights, but there's going to be consequences if you do so. Ultimately, you'll not suffer it, but they can detain you, and that could really make your day a mess, right? So that's where we are. But you got to say something. Why are these DEA agents running around in Washington, D.C. when you have a fentanyl crisis in Arizona and DEA agents are being taken away from protecting America from the flow of fentanyl across the Arizona-Mexico border? It's a total reworking of priorities simply because he wants to try to get his deportation numbers up. And frankly, Biden's numbers are still beating him. Yeah,
that's a very real question. Do I have to roll my window down if I get stopped at a checkpoint? Serious.
What the law says is your information about your name is not constitutionally protected. Do you have to roll your window down? It's probably a good idea because they might do nasty things to you if you don't.
Okay.
There's constitutional rights, and then there's if you really want to, go ahead and get eggs and milk at the grocery store, right? But that being said, you have no constitutional obligation to incriminate yourself in any way, and you don't need to answer that question. Are you a citizen? But of course, like I said, if you want to get to the grocery store, a lot of people just say, "Yeah, I'm a citizen." Bye. So.
We always learn a lot. It's an experience with Robert McWhirter. Great to see you again, sir. From the law office of Robert McWhirter, live on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.